for having me, everyone. So I am an attorney who specializes in disability. I actually work in the New York office, but the main office of our firm is very close. We do a lot of work with transplant patients, maybe folks leading up to that. There's going to be a lot of slides that do go over a lot of info, but the main takeaway is it's really a program for anyone who has had to stop working because of a health issue. It might not even be a transplant, maybe it's a worsening issue, you haven't actually got up to the transplant yet, but if your health is preventing you from working, then consider applying for disability. Maybe it's just something that might be a few years off, but as long as you have the info, then we think that's the best way to sort of arm yourself. So without further ado, my assistant is gonna help me click through. So just a few sort of background things, and I just sort of touched on this. But disability through the federal government comes in a couple different forms, and it's for both adults and children. But for adults, the standard they use is if it's affecting your ability to work. For children, they're looking to see if it's affected their development. And so we always tell our clients, and really this is just good advice, it is always better to, as long as you're able to keep working, you probably make a lot more working than you would on disability, but also the standard that they are looking at is if you're able to continue working. So as long as you are able to, it's always the best option. And this is just a quick reminder, we have a lot of folks that come to us and feel kind of funny about applying for different government programs, or they kind of look at it as maybe a handout or something like that. It's really important to keep in mind that it's something that you paid into when you're working. And we always look at it, and actually the full name is Social Security Disability Insurance. So we always look at it as an insurance program that you've paid into it and now you need to collect on, rather than some sort of just a government program or something. We'll just leave it at that. So it's certainly something that you have paid into. Okay, and so in terms of, as I said, for SSD, Social Security Disability Insurance, it is for folks who paid into it. If you don't have enough work credits, let's just say you didn't work for enough years, or let's just say you worked many years ago and you haven't worked recently, then there's also a program for folks that meet a low income threshold, and that's Supplemental Security Income, it's SSI, and that's also what children would be covered under. And so we'll get to some slides about that in a few minutes, but for SSI, there's very strict guidelines about income and assets. So they're both programs for disabled individuals, but one is based on what you paid into when you're working, and one is based on your income and assets. Okay, again, so just sort of going over it, it is something that we always say you've earned the right to apply for it for SSD because you have paid into it when you're working. And again, this is the main thing to keep in mind. Any medical condition, this could also go for if you have a loved one who maybe has a really bad back, or if something like that is popping into your head, they can apply as well. It doesn't have to be a condition that requires a transplant or something like that. As long as you have a health issue that's preventing you from working and that you're getting medical treatment for, that is the program for you. Now, in terms of the way they define working, they consider working to be anyone who is making gross $1,220 a month. So let's just say that you do work a little bit, maybe you work part-time or very, very few hours. If you're making less than $1,220 gross per month, you can still apply. They don't consider that to be full-time. Okay, and just a few of the benefits. So this is all your monthly amount. That is based on how much you paid into it when you're working. So it ranges from about $800, and then the maximum goes up a little bit every year. But currently the maximum that you could get is $2,700 a month. If you're approved, you're also entitled to retroactive benefits. That depends, it's different for everybody. Some people are not entitled to it. It depends on when Social Security believes that you became disabled. So if you, let's just say you apply today, but you've been out of work for a year, and they agree with you and they think that your health was preventing you from working for the past year, then you'd be entitled to retroactive benefits for that entire year. But let's just say you apply today because you stopped working today, and they say, okay, well, you were able to work before even though your health was impacting you, but you stopped working today, we'll approve you today, so then there will not be any retroactive benefits. It just goes back from the day that they find you disabled. Another benefit, if you are approved, you would be entitled to health insurance under Medicare. There is a waiting period imposed on that. It's 24 months, but it's 24 months from the date of disability. So again, it's similar to the retroactive. If they believe you became disabled a couple years ago or a year ago, you might have already used up the 24-month period. But if they believe that you became disabled present day, you still have that 24-month period to go. In addition, they do allow for extra money, so it will be more than this. It could be more than that $2,700 a month if you have children who are under 18. Okay, and so SSI, again, also a program for disabled individuals, but it's based on your income and assets. And unfortunately, they set the threshold very, very low. So for an individual who is applying, who's not married, they only allow you to have about $2,000 in income or assets, and that's per month. For a married couple, it goes up to $3,000, but they do require that you meet a very low income threshold. So for example, if you have more than one car, they would count that against you. If you had a property besides your own home that maybe you owned or had some ownership in, they would also count that against you as your income and assets. So SSI, it is difficult to get approved for, not necessarily medically, but a lot of times people will be approved medically, but not what they call technically, and that's because they don't meet a low enough income threshold. So that's something that Social Security will look at all of your income and assets and determine if you meet not only the medical portion, but also the financial portion, or what they call the technical portion. Okay, and then so for SSI, they also entitle you obviously to monthly benefits, but they cap it, they set a maximum amount of $771 a month. And that goes for everyone across the country, whether you're where we are, where the cost of living is much higher, or whether you're in the middle of the country, maybe where the cost of living is a little bit lower. So unfortunately, that is the maximum amount that you could get if you're on SSI. However, you are entitled to Medicaid health insurance as soon as you're found disabled. There is no 24-month wait time. And then unfortunately they do not provide benefits for children as SSD does. So that's how it differs a little bit. And so children, as I said, they are also entitled to or eligible for disability benefits, but the only program, because they haven't obviously paid into it, the only program that they would be eligible for would be SSI. Again, their standard is not really looking at can you perform work, it's more so looking to see has it affected their development. And again, because it is falling under the SSI heading, they're going to look at the income and assets of the family. So that's just a few things to keep in mind if we're talking about if anyone has any children that they're thinking of applying for. The 5-step process. So this is, it sounds a little bit like shop talk, but this is how Social Security determines if someone is disabled. We kind of went over the first point. So you have to either be out of work, or if you are working, you have to earn less than $1,220 a month before taxes. So that's the first thing. So if you apply and you're working, even if your health is really poor, if you are working and if you're working making more than that monthly amount, they will just technically deny you. You could be the most disabled person in the world, they won't go any further. The second thing they're looking for is what they call the duration requirement. And so when they are evaluating cases, they're not looking for someone to have a temporary health issue. So lots of times we get folks that have maybe had, a fracture or some type of issue that is preventing them from working now, but it's not expected to last very long. Certainly not 12 months. Social Security, again, they will deny you because they are looking for health issues that either have already lasted or are expected to last at least 12 months, or unfortunately result in death. So again, if it's something that, you know, if it's a health issue that is not expected to last beyond 12 months or hasn't already lasted beyond 12 months, they will again deny you. Number 3 is very pertinent for anyone that has had a transplant. So once you get through those sort of technical steps, then they start to look at your health issues. And there's basically 2 different ways to get approved for disability. The first way is if your health is so severe, it meets something called a medical listing. The second way is to prove that you can't work any longer, either in a job you've done in the past or any other work. And so a medical listing, as I said, that is something where Social Security basically has a guidebook. And do we have a slide on that? Maybe the next one. Do you want to click to the next one?
Should be 2 more to there.
Okay, you can just go.
Do you want the previous?
No, I think we can go to the next one.
With the
One
next
more.
one.
Here we go. So for the way that it works with the medical listing, so every health issue that exists, Social Security has a guidebook, and it says to them if your health meets certain criteria, like let's just say I'm going to use an example of a back issue, because a lot of people apply for back issues. So if you have a lumbar spine condition, and if it is affecting, let's just say your legs, and if you've had XYZ treatments and they haven't helped, their guidelines say, you know, if you meet these things, then you're automatically approved. And so that's where they have specific, what they call listings for transplants and for conditions that pertain to transplants. And I think if you go one more. So here's all the different listings. So this is where they have things like pertaining to the back and stuff like that. But as you can see, I know some people had mentioned about having cardiac issues and things of that nature. So for every health issue that exists, they have a listing that pertains. And so if someone has had a transplant under Social Security rules, if it's a transplant that falls under one of these headings, they will automatically approve you. And they will approve you for benefits for 1 year following your transplant. And if your health was poor enough prior to that transplant, you could possibly get approved during that time as well. But that is a way that it sort of takes out, they don't look at whether or not you could perform work if that is the case. They recognize that your health is so severe that, you know, that's not even a consideration. They know that it's, as I said, that severe, and they just determine you disabled without going to the following criteria. And again, so there is a website, they have all of the different listings, and I think there's maybe one more slide that pertains. Okay, so if they say, you know what, your condition is not severe enough to meet what's called a listing, they move to the next sort of criteria.
Quick question. If you are severe enough that the doctors say you need to go on the list for a transplant, does that make you hit the Social Security listing?
It doesn't make you meet the listing for the transplant, but it could make you meet the listing for the disease. So like, for example, you might not meet the listing for, let's just say, a liver transplant, but they have a separate one for liver disease. So I would imagine if your health has progressed to the point where you actually need a transplant, you might fall under a different part of the listing. So it's not just, I know it's a little bit strange to think about, but they'll have a separate listing for someone that's had a transplant, then they'll have a separate one for someone that just has the disease associated, and if it's gotten that bad, then you could qualify for the listing without actually having a transplant. And if not, they can move on to this next sort of consideration, and this is where a lot of people who don't meet the listing, this is where a lot of people can get approved. They look at, really steps 4 and 5 go together. So they move on to see whether or not you could perform work. And when they're talking about work, the first thing they look at is to see if you can do work that you've had experience with. And in their eyes, they consider experience to be work you've done in the past 15 years. So let's just say you had a job, data entry or something like that. That's the first thing they'll do, and look to see, okay, well, would your health prevent you from doing data entry? They'll look to see what your job duties were. Okay, were you mostly sitting down during the day? Were you kind of running around, multitasking? That is what they'll look at. If they think you can do your past work, then unfortunately they will deny you. And if they don't think you can do your past work, they will go to one more step. And so they will look to see, okay, well, you know what, we know your past work was too demanding, you couldn't do something like that, but could you do something that was simpler? So I always, just to be safe, anytime anyone asks me a question, I always say, could you do the simplest job imaginable? Because if the answer to that is no, then you would be approved under their rules. So lots of times when people come to us, they'll say, you know, I had a job in construction, I can't do that anymore. And it's really tough to have to tell them Social Security is going a step beyond that. They're looking to see, okay, well, we know you have experience doing construction or something very labor intensive, but they don't just judge you on that. They will go to even a simpler job, even a light duty job. The standard really, when you think about Social Security disability, the standard would be, could you perform any work at all, even the simplest job imaginable? And if the answer to that is no, then that's what they're basically looking to hear. And they're looking to see that with your medical records, and then also, you know, with your own personal testimony. They send you questionnaires, try to find out what you're capable of, what you're doing on a daily basis. They look at all of that info together to see if they also believe that you cannot perform any work. I don't know if we have to do the other slides. Here's where age kind of, it does work in our favor the older you get. So as you get older, especially 50 and over, the rules do bend in your favor a little bit. They do sort of realize that you couldn't go out and learn a completely new field. So they do kind of limit their inquiry really to just looking at work you did in the past or work you might have skills with. So that's where the older you are, the rules do bend in your favor a bit. And then this is just basically explaining, lots of folks when they come to us, they think that it's something that you have to be on for a lifetime. It absolutely isn't. As long as you feel as though, once you're approved, as long as you feel as though you need it, it's available for you. But if you do feel as though you've made some improvements and you want to try to go back to work, they do encourage that. And let's just say you do feel capable of returning to work, and you do go out and get a job, they do not cut your benefits off right away. They do allow you a 9-month, what they call trial work period, to go out and earn more than that $1,220 a month. And so they give you that time to kind of see, you know, is working right for me? Did I rush into this? Is my health, once I've been out in the working world, is my health too poor to continue? So they do really encourage that, and they give you that 9-month period to try to go back to work. Again, I think I mentioned this earlier, the most important thing they are looking at is your medical treatment. So it's not just enough that you've been diagnosed with a health issue. They really do want to see consistent treatment. I don't think that would be an issue with anyone here because you obviously are going to have the treatment, but it's something that they are looking for, and they're looking to see sort of that documentation of how severe things are, and you know, if they've gotten better. It's really what they're looking at. Okay, I think that's it. So did anyone have any questions? Yes.
I have a question about what you were talking about, retroactive. So if you went out on disability because you had one of the major conditions, and eventually they decide they do cardiovascular,
right,
you know, you do disability. And that retroactive thing, if they also at the same time you had a pretty decent job, in anticipation the job allowed you to purchase disability insurance on there.
Okay.
So maybe you were out, and for the year you were out, the job paid you for a year. Then you applied for disability. When they look at that, is that something that would keep them from giving you retroactive?
So is it through the job or through like a private long-term disability policy?
It was through the job, but it may have been a private firm that they hired on.
Okay, it sounds like that's the case. That's fine, you can still get approved for Social Security disability. Social Security doesn't lower your amount, but sometimes the private insurer will say, hey, look, you were approved for Social Security disability, you have to give us back some of that money. We were paying you these monthly benefits.
Well, specifically when I'm acting with Social Security, in some cases they'll give people retroactive, where they'll deny you getting retroactive because they knew you were getting disability from your job, which almost equals your wage.
No, not if it's, unless it's something where, let's just say you had an employer who was trying to work with you and they were paying you, but it looked like wages, which I don't think that would be the case. But I've had some clients say, hey, my boss was really tight with me, you know, he was just kind of still keeping me on the payroll. If Social Security can't differentiate that was an insurance program rather than, income, that would be the only time I could see that being a factor. But no, they allow you to have any private policies and have it not affect your retroactive.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
What happens when you become of age to collect Social Security? Does the SSDI end?
It ends, yes. You can collect both at the same time. It will just naturally go to your full retirement amount. But the benefit is that you won't have to take early retirement at that reduced penalty rate. You would just go, as I said, right into your full retirement amount.
And what do they consider full retirement? Whatever Social Security considers?
Right.
Your full retirement age?
Yeah.
I was curious, because I know sometimes through the years, you got those things that were sent out
Right.
that tells you this is what you get if you're disabled, this is what you get when you turn 65. So you did wonder that when you turn 65, did they switch back?
Yes, it goes to the full retirement rate.
Which could be less.
Usually it's more.
Yeah.
Usually it's a little bit more. And I know they used to send those like things out, but I think now they've done away with that. But you can find it on SSA.gov. You can find your rates on there.
Okay.
Did you have a question? Sam?
Yeah, is there a waiting period, like a week, like you have with like?
That's actually a great question. So unfortunately, it is not a week. So right now, Social Security has a 1 million case backlog. So the wait time is very, very long, and I should have mentioned this. They have a couple different stages. So if let's just say you apply today, you would go into something called the initial application phase. I would say right now in our area, the wait time for that is about 4 to 6 months. Would you agree? It's about 4 to 6 months to hear back whether or not you're approved. Sometimes maybe a little bit faster if they see your health issue is so severe requiring a transplant or something like that. They might try to put it on a critical list and have it approved a little bit faster, but I think we're always dealing with a matter of months for sure. I think maybe the minimum would be about 3 or so. Unfortunately, if you are denied for that, it would progress to a further stage if it requires a hearing in front of a judge. That can take sometimes, I think the wait time now is about 16 months. And again, that's all because of that backlog. So that wait time basically represents people that applied before you that were denied before you, and are now just kind of waiting to get in front of the judge. So that's actually a great question because the wait time is quite long.
And to clarify our area, because some of our guests, most of our guests are not Philadelphia.
Okay.
Regionally located.
I'm thinking East Coast. I think that Midwest, the wait time, and again, this is all on, I think is it SSA.gov? They have a wait time broken down by every state and every Social Security office. So I think the wait time now, I would say for the East Coast is probably about
16 to 18 months. The national average is 12 to 18.
That's for a hearing. But again, if you're someone who's had a transplant or approaching a transplant, our hope would be that you would be approved at the initial level because I think that your conditions would meet those listings. So if it's approved that early on, you wouldn't have to go in front of a judge, but it would still, I would say, be about 3 to 6 months at that initial level. As I said, sometimes in the Midwest, the time is a little bit less, but I think probably anywhere on the East Coast would be about 3 to 6 months.
Brynn, if I could share a story and then let you comment on it. A number of years ago, one of our heart recipients came back from the U.S. Transplant Games and had heard from the New York team that like 80% of heart recipients remain disabled. And I have to admit at the time I said, you gotta be kidding me, why are they disabled? And so there are extreme cases, but in general, I'm talking just hearts now, but it also applies in different other organs. After 6 to 9 months, you recovered. It sounds strange, but it's true. And so I went to our local transplant program and I said, by the way, can this be true? She says, oh, Jim, she says, 6 to 9 months, no, you're typically not disabled, but we have patients who argue vehemently they want to be kept on disability for these kind of reasons. It becomes a shouting match between the doctors and the patient. But our doctors don't transplant people to make them disabled for life. And then on top of that, I can recall years ago we had a presentation about Social Security. This goes back many years. And the room was crowded. And this one mother really got very testy with the presenter. Like, my son is 18 and he's had a kidney transplant 2 years ago. He can't go to work. And I thought, oh my God, he probably is not disabled, but he is disabled because of her. And so It's one of those things that the general public looks at you and says, wow, you've had this? And in most cases, and I always say there are exceptions, okay? And we're not talking about somebody who's in retirement or at a job that they hate or something like that. We're talking about ability to work. That disability can go away in 6 to 9 months in a normal recovery process. How does that play? Have you, in the patients you worked with, do you see that happening where they're fighting for disability when in fact, hey, you recovered, let's get on with life, or?
You know, I'm lucky enough that I don't really see that. The only time I ever see that is when I go to court for a client of mine who has the opposite issue and has been
Right.
fighting a long time and all their doctors agree. And then occasionally in court, I'll look over and I'll see someone who is there on their own, maybe not with an attorney, and you know, they're sitting there, you can just tell from what they're saying, oh, you know, going on a cruise tomorrow,
Yeah.
and you know, I was cutting the lawn yesterday, and then they said like they'd had a heart transplant. You're thinking, oh my God, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
You're making it really hard for someone else,
Yeah.
you know. So I personally don't see that, you know, with my clients, but I'm sure that exists. I know that exists, and I think it's made it really tough for other people. And I think that's why, you know, I've even had some judges say like, when my clients really haven't done well after the transplant, and they'll say, well, how come you're not better? You know, you should be up and around. And I'm thinking, well, have you seen the medical records? You know, this person said every complication, every
Right.
setback. So I don't personally see that, but I have heard that. I have sort of seen it on the, you know, outskirts, and I think it makes it really tough for other people who, you know, who really need it, for sure.
I can say I'm seeing it and talk to people, and with various conditions, but specifically the back. They have applied to get operated, they fix the back, then something else goes wrong because it's not quite right, then they gotta get rods and pins, then they go back, then now the hips, then it's the leg and something else, and they're constantly in the hospital, and then they stay on because the situation keeps coming out. And when they come out and they send you those questionnaires and look into you, you keep going back in the hospital, and then no one really will hire you if you got
Right.
every time you come to work, you're out every 2 or 3 weeks. So it becomes,
Yeah.
so.
Part of that
mhm.
is if we've had a transplant that was life-threatening solution, right?
Mhm.
Now you're living longer. And if you're out 25 years, guess what? I got a lot of conditions because of my age that have nothing to do with transplant anymore, you know? And yeah, you can find I got transplant on one of these meds and now I got this, and this. I'm sorry, you're out in your 70s or 80s, you know, and you're gonna have conditions. And so I'm sure you would qualify under those other medical conditions having nothing to do with the transplant.
But you're already on Social Security, so it doesn't matter. Because you're,
I'm talking about just patients
no, but
in
you're
general.
saying people that are 70 or 80, but they're already on Social Security, so
True.
that doesn't count.
We put on a workshop, Trio chapter put on a workshop for patients about getting back to work after transplant. And I realized that's kind of cheeky to tell somebody they should go back to work. I mean, who am I telling that? So we changed the title, How to Live a Fulfilled Life Post-Transplant, which could include work, maybe not. And Penn was the sponsor of it, and so we were using their communications for Penn patients. And the social worker said, Jim, listen, we've got limited number of seats, and so, you know, when you get a response from somebody who's in their 70s, you know, let's save the seats for somebody younger. And, okay, you know, because they're obviously not going back to work, is the way she saw it. And we had too few apply for the seats we had, so we had extra seats. So I said, well, I'll call these couple people that we passed over because, you know, I couldn't get in touch with 3 of them. We had 3. I couldn't get in touch with them. They're all in their 70s. They're all post-heart transplant, and they were all working. And I said, God, I need them on the panel to show the other patients that, hey, sometimes it's our mental expectation that can limit us. And so the inspiration of seeing people doing things, again, there are exceptions and there are people that really have a tough time post-transplant. Always keep that in mind. But then again, we tend to be involved in groups where people are out doing things. And they say, well, geez, everybody's doing things. Not everybody. So don't ever mistake what I'm saying here, okay?
Very well said, Jim. You have a question?
No, I was just gonna say, Social Security is gonna do a periodic review anyway, and if they find that they believe your condition is improved, they'll try to throw you off of Social Security, and then you'd have to represent your medical evidence to establish that you're still disabled.
Right.
So I've seen that myself also.
Mhm.
So I've had people that you have to come back in and try to say that, yeah, although I have had XYZ as a condition, you know, you have done the treatment, you showed the medical evidence and you were disabled, but now that you're improved, you're no longer disabled, but you still have to go back. And really, it does matter with the follow-up. So if you do become working and you do become active and you do stop following up with all them doctors because your condition truly is better, you're not going to have the medical record to support that you're not able to work.
Exactly.
Can you speak more to that?
Right, and so that's something, especially for folks who are under 50 and nowadays even under 55, Social Security lots of times, and they will say it right on the decision when they approve you, they will say they are instituting what they call CDR. So it's continuing disability review. They usually will actually list the time frame that they will institute it. So let's just say they'll say, okay, in 24 months we'll do a CDR. They are looking, just as she said, they are looking to see if you're still treating, if your health is still poor, and if it is something where you have, you know, made a miraculous recovery or you're just doing a lot better. And your doctor's notes sort of start to say that, or they say, hey, you know, this person thinks they could work. They're going to start applying places. There's nothing wrong with that. That's actually great for you as a person, but for Social Security purposes, if they have already instituted that time frame, if they have already scheduled your case for review and they see that information, then they will institute the proceedings to sort of get you off of the program. But for folks, I would say, I usually see that with clients who are under 50, and as I said, even some under 55, but the older you get, I think they realize that it's not likely that you will have that type of recovery. They don't necessarily institute that review process.
Are they like on backlog on doing the reviews? Because when I first got on it in 2015, they're like, oh, we're gonna review it like in about a year. I have not gotten a review.
I don't know about that, but I would say, just because I know they are so backlogged in pretty much every other area, I would imagine so. I think it's due to not just the amount of people that apply, but also they are very understaffed. I hear that all the time from the judges and even just from you know, the reps and things like that. I know they are very understaffed, so I would imagine that is probably backlogged too.
Okay. Mr. Marks?
My employer told me because of Social Security disability, I'm going to have to terminate my employment,
Okay.
give back all the company equipment I have, computer, phone, all that kind of stuff. Is that correct?
So is it something that you've already been approved for Social Security disability, or?
Yes.
Okay, and then so when is the last time that you were working?
Well, it was March the 8th.
Okay.
But my short-term disability ends on September 12th.
Okay, so I would imagine, I think we're getting maybe a little bit into employment law, but I would imagine they are correct in saying that, because for Social Security disability purposes, you are basically certifying that you are not able to work any longer,
Okay,
so.
benefits all from the company, right?
Right, mm-hmm.
Not that they want me back, but it's just, they have
Yes.
to do this in order to be able to qualify.
Right.
Question. Brandon, did you have a question?
I had a couple questions. One might be this. With the Social Security disability, if you have that and you're going to turn 65, so and then you go into social retirement,
Right,
right?
mhm.
I think I heard a little bit about the numbers or the monies. Years ago, they did have that paper and it said, to me, what I remember is when you got more with disability than you did with your income.
I
So
think it's a little different now.
that's what I remember.
Okay,
So,
I know that, I think the full retirement amount is typically more than your disability amount, is it?
Mine is, I just go on SSA.gov. Mine-
Yes.
I
That's
had
what I've always-
67 in 2 months,
At
which is
full
my
retirement age,
full
yeah.
retirement.
mhm.
Not 65, 67
Yeah,
in
no,
2
not
months.
65. Yeah, mine is 66 also. But
Yeah.
They can change it.
Yeah, your full retirement amount is usually a little bit more than your disability amount.
Yeah, it's not much, it's like $200 a month more.
So the other question I had in reference to that was, how do your benefits change at that point? Because clearly you're on the red, white, and blue card thing going on if you're in disability. do you just keep that same company that you're in and continue with that? Like I have AARP.
Right.
Okay? So do I keep AARP? Well, I like their services, so I call myself checking into it, and it seems as though nothing is gonna change, this, that, and the other. So is that
That was my
kind of what
understanding as
happens?
well.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think anything too much changes, it's just sort of switches over to being paid out of a different fund.
Okay. And one more question in reference to that. Now, suppose you did do a child waste work program, okay? And it's the 9-month child-based thing. Okay, 2 questions. And you did work and you made more than what they said. So then now they take you off of the disability, right?
Right.
Is that correct?
Well, if it goes longer than the 9 months, so let's just say you trying to work, you're making a lot per month, but it just, you couldn't do it health-wise, they won't take you off of it unless it goes more than
Past
9
the 9
months.
months.
Yes.
Okay. All right. There was one more question with the money part. Sorry, I forgot it. I'll try to remember. I'll bring it up, guys.
Okay.
Thanks. Thank you.
Did you have another question?
No.
Any other questions? I had a question. Okay. So you talked about individuals non-married, and then you talked about married couples. Does the assets question come into play when adults are living with other adults? Because we often see that a lot where adult caregivers are taking care of adults. Right. It can, because they really are looking at household income. So that's something where it might not be, and this is only for SSI, it's not for SSD. So SSD, your household can make any amount at all. If SSI is what places the income threshold. So they do factor in your living, let's just say you have your rent paid, let's just say you're a recipient of other programs, anything that you're getting, even if you're getting, let's just say if your family's helping you out, anything, any money at all or any benefits at all, they do, they might not deny you, but they will reduce that 771 that we talked about, they will reduce that. So let's just say it's something where you have some outside program that's like giving you $200 a month, or you're living with someone and they're not charging you rent, they will look at the value of that and they will reduce your monthly benefits when they're calculating how much to give you. They call it unearned income. So they recognize that you're not out there, actually working for it, but they do factor that in when they're calculating how much you would get per month. Any other questions?
I have a question. It's a weird one.
Okay.
Now, suppose if you get Social Security disability and you had a spouse that passed away, but you never claimed anything on him. Could you later on down the road, like a long time later on down the road, say, let me put his Social Security in and see if his benefits would have been more than mine? Can you ever do that in any space of time?
Yes, if they have passed within the past 7 years of you applying. So if it's something where they passed a very long time ago, more than 7 years ago, you can't. But if they have passed away within the past 7 years, then you could. That's actually not that weird of a question. Lots of people are asking about that.
So, okay, now part 2 to that question. If they passed away, oh, that's one thing. But how about if they were still alive and you got a divorce? What about that?
No, they unfortunately have to pass away in order to collect under theirs.
Now, one other less obvious question is, when would it be beneficial for the patient to enlist the services of a company like yours as opposed to representing themselves through this process?
I think that's a good question. I mean, obviously I'm biased, I'm always going to say it right away. But practically speaking, especially for people that are undergoing transplants and things like that, your health is so severe, there is a good chance that you will be approved earlier on in the process. So I think that the attorney is most beneficial at a hearing. Because earlier on, it's more so, we're corresponding with Social Security. It's not as much for us to go in front of anybody. So the initial process, when you do your initial application, It's a social security office. It's more of an administrative office that's looking at all the medical records. They're still doing the same evaluation, but it's not a judge. It's a panel, it includes doctors and things like that. They might actually ask you to go to one of their doctors and do an exam. That's all part of that 4 to 6 months or 3 to 6 months that we talked about. And so from there, but a lot of folks, if you're approaching a transplant or if you've had one, you can get approved earlier on. I don't necessarily know that, you need an attorney if you're going to get approved that quickly. The one thing I will say is that, so Social Security is not working for you. So if you do have an attorney, the things they're keeping track of are deadlines, are all the little things. At the initial level, you're getting a lot of things in the mail that you have to fill out, send back, questionnaires. We've had people come to us who we later find out they were denied for not even signing a form and sending it back. So Social Security is not going to stay on top of you and tell you, you have to sign that back, you're going to get denied, you have a great case, do you want to get denied for not sending that back? Or, hey, they set you up for this exam and you didn't go. Oh, you didn't know about it? So that's where I do think an attorney is good. If you're someone who is undergoing a lot of medical procedures, back and forth with appointments, it would be the attorney's job to keep in touch and keep track of all that administrative stuff. But it's not necessarily something where if you can keep on top of all that stuff, you could apply on your own and you might be able to get approved earlier on. But certainly, in my opinion, at a hearing, I think you're really doing yourself a disservice if you don't have an attorney. And that's where again, I'm just using my experience, kind of like listening to people in the waiting room. They don't realize the standard that it's any job at all. So I hear them in the waiting room saying like, well, I can't go back to being a nurse, or I can't go back to being like this. I'm thinking to myself, oh, and I hear them saying like, well, who's going to give me a sit-down job? That is not what they're looking at. They're looking at, could your health prevent you from doing a sit-down job? So if you go in there without an attorney and you're telling the judge, Your Honor, I can't be a nurse anymore, and who's going to give me a sit-down job at 50 years old? You're going to get denied. But if you have an attorney who helps you understand, look at what they're looking at. Do you think you could do a sit-down job? Do you think you could be there 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week? And the person goes, I don't know. No, I would like to work, but I couldn't do that, day in and day out. So that's something where the attorney can kind of help you understand what it is, what the standard is, and what you're looking at. So you definitely don't need one. I think you probably should go to a hearing without one, but if you're applying early on and your health is that severe, I think you could probably get approved without one. Again, like I said, there is a lot of administrative stuff that if you feel as though you can keep on top of, certainly, apply on your own. Yeah, I'm sorry, sir.
I have my own experience, but as you're fighting for somebody for this, how are you compensated?
Oh, so all law firms, it's not just our law firm, all law firms are bound by a Social Security regulation that says we can only get paid based on retroactive benefits. It's always the same amount, 25% of the back pay. And the reason why they do that is because dealing with Social Security is so tedious and time consuming. If they allowed attorneys to charge like by the hour, they sometimes will sit on hold for an hour just to get through with a rep. Or, it takes us 2 years to get in front of a judge. So if they allow people to bill by time put in, it would just be crazy. So they just impose that flat rate of 25% or whatever your back pay is. And that's whether you're approved within the 4 to 6 months early on, or whether you're approved when you go in front of a judge. But the maximum by law that you can ever get, any attorney can ever get, is $6,000. So let's just say your 25% of your back pay is $15,000. We couldn't get that, and no attorney could. You could only get $6,000 maximum.
If you don't get any back pay?
Then, as far as I'm aware, I know our firm, but I don't believe any firm is really allowed to charge.
Great question. Any other questions? We have 5 minutes left.
One other commentary. In the world of transplants, okay, each condition has its own symptoms, and probably the most severe that I can think of is liver failure, in which case the poisons in the blood get to the point where the person really gets confused and would not be able to take care of things themselves. For others, at heart, you are tired, you sleep a lot, but your head's still pretty straightforward. And so it really would be very different by type of organ failure as to whether, if you don't have a smart caregiver doing this for you, that you need an attorney. But what you just explained has been very interesting to realize that there's a cap Two, it's only for the retroactive stuff.
Right.
Wow, that was enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.